Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining the Diversity Project for our 5th anniversary event. Just a few small housekeeping items. We are recording the event, and if you have colleagues who would be interested in viewing it, it'll be available on our Diversity Project website, hopefully at some point tomorrow. We also have switched on the transcript function, so you'll see what we're saying coming up as words at the bottom of your screen. But if you find that distracting, then you can switch that off using the right function from your menu. So bear with us. If you don't want to have that, you can switch it off. And last but not least, if you do want to ask a question, and there'll be plenty of opportunity to ask us questions of our panelists, particularly later on, then please use the Q&A function rather than the chat. Just makes it a little easier. So 5 years, I have to say it's quite a milestone, a cause to celebrate, to express thanks, and to reflect and to reset. And particularly as we look over the next 5 years and what we hope to achieve. It's worth starting by saying we now have 80 member firms, we have 50 partner organizations, 400 volunteers working across 17 different work streams, a 30-strong CEO advisory council, and 100 ambassadors. So thank you all for everything that you have done and continue to do. And I've been thinking inevitably perhaps about the day when Jane Welsh, Alexandra Haggard, and Sarah Bates came to see me at my offices at Newton back in 2016, early that year. And we talked about the very limited progress that we felt we were making as an industry around inclusion and diversity. The commitment then was very uneven. Of course, as always, there are fabulous champions, and there always were, but many people at that point were either complacent or skeptical about the whole agenda. And at the time, I think all 4 of us around the table at that point weren't too sure what the appetite would be, but we knew that something had to be done. Now, 5 years later, I'm happy to say that I'm convinced there's absolutely unswerving commitment to the goal of an inclusive, diverse investment and savings industry. There is fantastic leadership from the top, an amazing, truly amazing energy and enthusiasm at grassroots. There are very many specific achievements and initiatives that have been launched over the past 5 years that we can point to. And it actually would take me too long to list them all, so you'll be relieved here I'm not going to. I just want to give you a flavor. So we've launched the Investment Springboard in collaboration with the social mobility charity Upreach, which is designed to encourage students from less privileged socioeconomic backgrounds to join us in the industry. And that initiative has already seen 170 students gain work experience and mentoring over its first 2 years. Talk About Black was launched 3 years ago. It's created a whole new level of understanding about why there are only 15 Black fund managers in the industry. And is now running mentoring circles for school children and networks for Black professionals. LGBT Great is well on its way to the target it set itself of 1,000 openly LGBTQ+ investment professionals and their allies throughout the industry. The cross-company returnship program is now in its 2nd year. We've been working with women returners to create a way back into the industry for those who've taken a career break, many of whom, of course, are women. And we've had literally hundreds of applications, high quality applications for places. We have a thriving, and you'll hear more about this later, mental health initiative, which has played a really important role in the pandemic. It's created opportunities for mental health first aid training, as well as very popular Ask Me Anything sessions for employees of member firms. We have a big neurodiversity effort, educating employers and hosting very popular roundtables for employees, including for parents of neurodiverse children. Working families, again, vitally important for so many members over the pandemic, is now focusing on fathers and on carers. We've got a big push on smart working and have done for a couple of years now. Obviously, that's very much in tune with our world as we look to emerge successfully from the pandemic. Disability, we're encouraging all our member firms to be disability confident. And veterans, we've been creating a better understanding of the advantages of employing military veterans and encouraging members to sign up to the Armed Forces Covenant. So lots that has been achieved already. We've also been doing a lot of work on culture, including elevating the importance and quality of line management Our industry has perhaps not given that much thought in the past. We've also, perhaps unusually in today's world, recently launched a religion and culture workstream. And we've done a lot of analysis and published many reports with practical examples showing what companies can do to overcome the obstacles to making faster progress. For example, a recent report on data, an ethnicity pay gap reporting masterclass, and we're now working on something we're calling the Gender Equality by Design Manual. So there's a lot to be proud of, strong foundations for the next 5 years. But while we have been very active and harnessed so much new commitment and enthusiasm around the mission, we're impatient for more tangible results. There are still only, for example, around 13% female fund managers in our own member firms, and so many gaps even in the way we collect data about ourselves. And as we've reflected on what needs to happen over the next 5 years, we recognize as well that there is a very specific opportunity, not one we'd envisaged, but it's been created by the terrible pandemic. And of course, this isn't the way any of us had hoped for change to be made, but the pandemic has changed, is changing how we relate to each other, and of course, how we work. And this, we think, is a moment to seize to build different practices, a more fairer and more inclusive industry. So today we're going to be upping the ante from now on. We're setting higher and clearer goals, targets for the Diversity Project, and we will be encouraging our member firms to adopt the same. We've decided to set quantitative goals in 3 important areas: socioeconomic, ethnicity, and gender. Now, please note that doesn't mean in any way that we're not going to focus on the other areas, which are still incredibly important. It means instead that we're going to set those goals so we can gauge our success and our members' success and over the next 5 years. And of course, it allows us as well to concentrate on the points of intersectionality between those 3 areas to draw our different efforts together as well. So let me just quickly announce the new targets. In the socioeconomic area, we are setting the target of all member firms to collect socioeconomic data for their people, both entry level and existing staff, and to track promotions. Secondly, we want all member firms to support one or more of the graduate or school leaver programs available that are focused on socioeconomic diversity. And we are setting a target of at least 80% of interns and graduates to have attended state school for the duration of their secondary education between the ages of 11 and 16. In gender, where we've already set goals for 2030, where we want to have 30% female fund managers and a halving of gender pay gaps, we're setting 5-year goals from here: 20% female fund managers, up from 14% in the largest firms and 10% in the small groups. And as I said, 13% in our own member firms. And we want those targets to be adopted by individual member firms. We're aiming to reduce the gender pay gaps, and remember ours are amongst the worst of any sector, by 1/3 of their 2019 levels. We want to see a 50-50 recruitment between men and women, and at both graduate level and school leavers. And finally, and this is perhaps a very important new one, as we target our customers, we want to see an equal take-up of stocks and shares ISAs amongst men and women. And finally, the goal around ethnicity. Now, we'll come up with just one here, but we think it's an important goal. We want the industry to achieve a 90% ethnicity disclosure rate within 2 years. So this is not a 5-year goal. This is over the next 2 years. We want member firms to have 90% of our member firms to be disclosing their ethnicity. And that will provide a basis for additional targets to be set. We need a baseline. So watch this space for a new 90% campaign. Of course, it's easy to set targets. Reaching them is the tricky part. And I, though, am confident that we have momentum today, that the will is there, and that with these clearer, more measurable goals, alongside the reality of very live, very new thinking about how we work best, and with, of course, your valued support and involvement, I think those results will follow. So I look forward to seeing you in another 5 years' time. Let's switch gears now. What I'd like to do is to introduce you to Steve Butler, CEO of Punter Saville Aspire, a member of the Diversity Project's Advisory Council. He's the executive sponsor of our Smart Working workstream, and he's an expert on intergenerational working in older workers. But most importantly, and Steve, please turn on your camera so we can see you. He's a great guy. He has been so giving with his time and genuinely committed to inclusion. Steve has gone above and beyond on every level, and including what we're announcing as well today, the publication of this book, the Diversity Project book, which documents the journey so far. And Steve is very generously donating all the proceeds from the book to the Diversity Project charity. And my last plug is available on Amazon and in all good bookshops. So Steve, thank you so much again, both for joining us today and for writing the book. A fairly basic question to start with. I mean, what possessed you? Why did you decide to write this book? It's not as if you don't have other things that you could be doing.
Okay. Hi, Helena. So that question, two reasons really. As you know, I became involved with the Diversity Project 2 years ago. And since then, without exception, everyone I've met has been absolutely passionate to the cause and just inspiring to kind of watch and hear their stories. So from a personal perspective, I was really keen to invite all those people into my business to tell their stories. And of course, that's not practical. So from a selfish perspective, the book was a way to document these stories of everyone in the Diversity Project to kind of bring into my own business. But I think probably more significantly, I'm very aware that after the success of the last 5 years of the Diversity Project, if we're going to maintain momentum over the next 5 years, we really need to engage the army of middle managers across the investment and savings industry. So this book was really thinking about them, providing them with the stories that they needed to read to help them kind of reflect and develop their own management style in order to kind of evolve an inclusive culture within their businesses. So I hope the book can be a starting point for managers to reflect and implement some of the recommendations as advised by people interviewed within the book.
Well, again, it's a tremendous thing, because I think the key to highlight is it is personal stories. It is the people who be leading the work streams, who've come up with the ideas, what's worked, what hasn't, and their reflections. I mean, there's so many people involved in the Diversity Project. One of our challenges, of course, is keeping it all, greater than the sum of the parts, because there's so many people. There must have been challenges in getting it all out there. Perhaps you want to share a few of those and just get it off your chest, Steve. Now you're through to the other side.
It was a challenging book, and as you know, there were a number of rewrites along the way. I've published 2 management books before, and this was by far the hardest. And that's because the Diversity Project is organic. Every week there's new initiatives or kind of new developments, new work streams, and it's happening all the time. And as quickly as you write something, it becomes out of date. If I wanted to create the perfect book, I'd still be doing rewrites and edits now to kind of keep it up to date. So I focused on interviewing people, which I did about this time last year. And we focused on their personal stories to paint a picture of what their experiences were, rather than the specifics of the great work that's going on in the Diversity Project. That's what the website's for. If you want the most up-to-date stuff, it's there. So I think that was a big challenge, and it took me some time to kind of arrive at that point. The other challenge I had, and this is probably obvious to absolutely everyone else, but it wasn't obvious to me at the time, and it didn't occur to me till I got going, is there's so much to say. You could actually write a book on every work stream within the Diversity Project, and I was trying to capture the whole project in 40,000 words. So, I think this is my opportunity to apologise to everyone who wasn't included, wasn't interviewed, their initiatives aren't included in the book, because I'd say sticking to the word count was the hardest things I've had to do.
Well, I think you have crammed an awful lot in there, and we are so often, tell us more about the Diversity Project. And of course, as you say, it's a live beast, really. It's moving very rapidly, and at the very least, people are interested in what's happened so far and getting a flavour of the breadth of the work. And of course, just hearing, I think it's nothing better than the voices of the people who've been doing it rather than sort of theorizing. I mean, this is people who are actually engaged. I mean, you've touched on this a little bit, Steve, but what are the main conclusions that you hope that readers will take away from the book?
Well, I think, you know, we all work with some incredible people in this industry, and they've got some amazing stories to tell. And I think the moment you take time to kind of listen to people's stories and hear their journeys, you feel much more connected with them, and you have much more empathy with kind of where they're coming from and the experiences that we have. So yeah, I know if we want to create more inclusive cultures, there's structural things that we need to change within our organizations. But I do believe at the very heart, it's about connections, and it's about having empathy with people. So I hope this book is about starting the conversation of people sharing their stories more openly within their own workplace, and that those stories don't hold them back. They're an opportunity for their careers to grow, and that, you know, these stories create more connections across our businesses.
Well, that is a wonderful aspiration, and I hope that it's fulfilled. I think ultimately, everything only comes together when people connect as human beings, and you know, no one's going to be told what to do in our industry more than any other industry, I think, but people really believing it, hearts and minds, and understand the other person is the starting point. So thank you again, Steve. We're very, very grateful, and we hope that everyone who gets hold of a copy of the book, as I said, available from all good booksellers, really enjoys it. And remember that the money will go to the Diversity Project charity, which also is furthering inclusion in a whole range of areas. So thank you so much again, Steve, and we're truly grateful. I'd now like to introduce Jane Welsh. So Jane, please put on your camera. Now, I first met Jane when she was one of those, you know, pension fund consultants at Willis Towers Watson. I think Watson when you first joined it, Jane. And if I get this right, you were head of global equities, and, you know, we were desperately trying to get on the buy list. I had a lot of grilling from Jane. So I know that she's knew she was a high quality individual. But over the last 4 years, she has, or longer, obviously, but 4 years, she's been working as project manager on the Diversity Project. Jane is the total, let's call it, unsung heroine of the piece. So Jane does all of the project management. She chases up things that might not be working well. And probably most importantly, in my book anyway, spends a lot of the time talking to our member firms and ensuring that they are getting something out of the project, that there are connections between these work streams, and they're very enthusiastic people working on them. And then as we try to embed what we're doing back in the firm. So first of all, I just want to use this opportunity, Jane, to say a huge thank you from me personally for everything that you have been doing. And hopefully the 5 years doesn't prove to be enough. But I know you've got a fabulous panel to introduce, so I'm going to pass on the baton to you to introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if my fellow panelists could put on their cameras, that would be wonderful. So this panel is really to give you all a sort of a taster around 3 very important work streams that have been beavering away and doing some fantastic work. So I'd like to introduce them each in turn and ask them a couple of questions just to get the conversation going. So if I could start with Katie. Now, Katie is the co-lead for the mental health work stream, and she currently works for T. Rowe Price. And although when I first met her, she was at BlackRock. Katie, perhaps you could tell me a little bit about why you decided to champion the cause of mental health.
Absolutely, thank you, Jane. Hi, everybody. So I was first invited to participate in the DP when I was asked to help out disability workstream, which was about 5 years ago. And at the time, I had been involved in the creation of a new.
Katie, I think there's some problem with your sound. I don't know if perhaps we might move on to Gavin and maybe come back to you, Katie, if there seems to be a bit of an echo.
Okay, no problem.
So Gavin, perhaps I could ask the same question of you. Gavin is a co-founder of the #Talk About Black work stream and is working at BlackRock. It would be lovely to hear from you as to why you decided to champion the Talk About Black initiative.
Thanks, Jane, and good afternoon, everyone. And of course, happy to. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was, you probably heard this term a number of times. It was quite an organic process for me to join the Diversity Project. So certainly when it first launched, there were a range of work streams. And I think one of the gaps that Jane, Helena, Alex and Sarah had was around ethnicity. And it was, I guess, getting off the ground, but I think relatively slowly. So probably about a year into the Diversity Project, I was asked to join. And I said yes, a little bit like reluctantly, because like I think many people involved in the Diversity Project, it felt like, you know, you're walking into the unknown. You don't know, I guess, how addressing, issues, certainly for me around race, would be taken and perceived by the industry. But, and I've said this on some occasion before, but I remember lamenting to my wife and saying this issue around race just never seems to be discussed. So what we see are firms thinking they're doing a good job around gender, actually not doing that great a job, certainly at not that time. And then no discussion around race. And one of the reasons I was reluctant is because I felt that, somebody or some entity should be leading the discussion. And she said, well, actually, whether you like it or not, it has to be you, because you're one of the most senior Black people in the industry, which is an issue because I'm, senior, but I could be more senior, certainly then. And, if you don't do it, who else will? So I felt there was a gap and felt I had a responsibility to ensure that those who were, I guess, coming up in the industry would have simply a much easier time than I and the other members of Talk About Black did. And the final thing I would also say is that I was inspired by what the Diversity Project was doing. And I've also always said that it's this group that really beat down the door to let others walk in. So that really did help.
Thank you for that. And perhaps a follow-up question would be, what are you most proud of in terms of what's been achieved so far by your work stream?
Yeah, I think, honestly, Jane, it's the impact it's had on individuals quite simply. I mean, I do feel we've moved the dial in terms of at least the awareness of the issue, as has been discussed. We still have a long way to go in terms of the tangibles, but I do think at least the topic is now on the agenda. And I could have said, the I Am campaign, the mentoring circles, the skills, but I could have write a list about the number of things that we've done, but honestly, it simply is about the impact on individuals. So what people don't see, and even what we sometimes don't see, is just how much it has helped people, not all Black, other minorities, and also white people feel that, okay, they have a place in the industry, they can achieve. And what is really satisfying when it gets really difficult is a number of messages that we get saying a simple thank you, and you don't know how much you've helped. And that was basically what it's about. That really is what it's about. So I would say that more than anything.
That's fantastic. Katie, I don't know, I'm turning back to you. Perhaps I could go back to the question about mental health and why you decided to get involved.
Absolutely. Is the sound better?
Perfect.
Fabulous. Right, sorry about that, everybody. Okie dokes. So I was first invited to participate in the Diversity Project when I was asked to help out with the disability work stream, which was about 4 years ago now. At the time, I had been involved in the creation of a new employee network that focused on disability within the organisation I was working for. And the session I got involved at industry level just made sense to me as an opportunity to influence change at industry level and to learn from my peers. Then in April 2020, I was asked by you guys at the DP to create a separate work stream for mental health at a time when it was felt that a specific focus was needed on the topic, given the COVID pandemic and the dramatic shift of the norm in our everyday lives. For me, mental health is something that every single one of us has in common. We all have it. And it's brilliant to be able to bring the asset management industry together and be instrumental in driving understanding, inclusion, best practice for mental health provision.
Thank you for that. And what are you most proud of so far?
Yeah, from a workstream perspective, I'm excited to see how quickly the workstream has become well established. We sprang to action and have contributed to the education of our members through initiatives such as the Ask Me Anything sessions with our industry leaders, and of course our mental health first aid training as well. I'm also incredibly proud of all of the individuals who have made personal contributions. The level of commitment and energy is amazing, and kudos to every single person that's involved. But I'm also quite proud of the industry, actually, not just for accepting the diversity project, but also for welcoming us and, of course, listening to us as well.
That's fantastic. And Emma, if I could introduce you. So Emma is the co-lead of our early careers work stream, which is very much focused on improving social mobility and works at LCP. So Emma, same questions for you about kind of why you got involved in the first place.
Yeah, so thank you, Jane, and hello to everyone here today. So yeah, as you said, our work stream covers early careers and has had that particular focus on increasing social mobility at entry level. And I think it's fair to say that those who are early on in their career just don't have a loud voice at the table in the industry, but they are the future. And so it's very much a business imperative that we do have that diverse mix if we're to meet all the future challenges that the industry will be facing. You know, everyone's talking about climate change at the moment. There's going to be the move to net zero. It's not going to be easy, and we absolutely need diverse thinkers to solve these problems and to come up with good solutions. The industry is changing, our clients are becoming more diverse, they have different priorities, and we need to adapt to that as well. And then maybe just touching on why social mobility, well, it covers off so many different aspects of diversity, but it's often overlooked. It's harder to measure, people don't want to talk about it. Just from a personal perspective, keeping it brief, I attended a state school, I had no contacts in the industry, and it just wasn't on my radar. So I think as an industry, we need to be mindful that it's us who needs to show university students from the diverse backgrounds that the industry is a place for them and that we will actively welcome them. So it's very much us who needs their talent. We need to work hard to attract it. And that's why I believe targeted programs such as our investment springboard that's been great, but also others like Investment 2020, the skills workshop, Gain, 100 back interns, all of them that are around at the moment are just so important and necessary.
Thank you for that. And you've touched on Springboard, but perhaps you could talk a bit more about what you're most proud of and what's been achieved so far.
Yes, so I'm really proud of all we've achieved with the Investment Springboard. We've partnered with a social mobility charity called Upreach, and they've been absolutely fantastic. As Helena mentioned, it's essentially a work experience and mentoring program for university students from less advantaged backgrounds. And as a result, we've provided an insight into the industry to over 250 and counting high potential students, whether that's through access to our webinars on topical issues, guidance from their industry mentors, or a week-long work experience placement at member firms. And we're delighted that we'll be going into our third year of the programme in September. And at this point, we'll have a 3-year programme established. So the intention is to reach students in their first year of university and maintain that contact throughout their whole university career before they hopefully enter the investment industry. And we hope that it will launch them into a successful start to their career, but most critically to improve retention over time. If they get off to a good start, they feel confident, they've got that knowledge and skills to succeed, we should see great success from them. So in short, I guess really pleased to have had such great support from member firms and to see their increasing involvement with the programme. Each year it increases dramatically, which is fantastic. So to anyone who's listening, who's been involved, a huge thank you to all of you for your hard work in making it possible.
Thank you. So we've heard about sort of why people got involved in the diversity project and what they kind of feel most proud about in terms of achievements to date, but perhaps we could turn now to the work that still needs to be done. And I'd encourage the people on the call to put in their questions into the Q&A function. We've got time for questions for the panel as well, so I encourage you to do that. So turning to Katie, what still needs to be done in your view?
So I think in a nutshell, mental health is a huge, wide-reaching topic that is multifaceted and at times extremely complicated. And as a work stream, we have multiple hopeful outcomes. The first being an independent educational program running through all of our member firms. So for all of our members to be organising training around mental health issues on a regular basis for their people. For there to be sufficient mental health resource or first aid provision within our member firms. So for all of our member firms and beyond actually, to have mental health first aid provision or an appropriate equivalent for support colleagues. And for all of our members to commit to putting in place the very best gold standard mental health programs and policies, remembering that there is intersectionality with every other dimension of diversity. And I think, from our perspective, mental health should not be a thing in its own right, but definitely a consideration for every single one of our other work streams as well.
Thanks, Katie. Perhaps I could ask Gavin for your thoughts on what still needs to be done and what you're planning to do over the next 5 years.
So yeah, I think we've often talked about the kinks in the hose pipes analogy that we use for the various hurdles and challenges that people from ethnic minorities and Black people in particular in the UK industry needs to navigate. So we use this analogy because it dictates the socioeconomic challenge, the education challenge, the challenge of getting into the industry, progressing and building a career, and the fact that the issue is still a taboo. And I think I would love to say that those kinks have been unwound, but I think they still remain. So the reality is these have been generations in the making, and we were never going to unwind them in a 4-year period. Perhaps the one where we have made the most progress is on the actual discussion, and that was always going to be the starting points. But I do think that is the other 4 absolutely remain, and we still need to get to grips with them. And our view would be that we have at least made a start, but it really takes the industry and a collective in society to start resolving these issues. So to put a finer point in it, that we still have many groups who are marginalized in society. There's still an underperformance in education. There still is a challenge in actually attracting talent, and there's also a challenge in terms of retaining and progressing that talent. So yeah, I think these are the challenges which we set, and they still remain. So yeah, so still some way to go, I feel.
Thank you. And Emma, what are your plans for the next 5 years? What still needs to be done?
Yeah, I think Gavin's analogy and the team's analogy of the kinks in the hose pipe is spot on. I think it's a great analogy. And with all aspects of D&I believe it's just a forever evolving work in progress. The more we look into it, the more kinks we discover, really, and there's just more to overcome. It's never going to be finished, so we shouldn't necessarily think that, you know, we're ticking things off. We're just doing little bit by little bit, and we'll get better at it over time, and we will access more talent at all levels in the long run. But if we focus back to the early careers, I guess what I'm finding is that actually, in some ways, getting the diverse candidates into the industry is the easier bit, and actually retaining them is another matter. And that's very much something with the whole team we're going to turn our attention to a lot more over the next 5 years. But similarly, we want to continue to run the investment springboard each year, making it bigger, better, more effective. We are going to do a rebrand, so look out for that over the coming months. You might see a different name coming up. But then we very much need the firms to take over. You know, we're doing all of this great work to get them engaged with the industry. But after that, our aim is to have, over the next 5 years, 2/3 of the students who we have on the springboard securing an internship opportunity or a graduate role by the time they finish their university career. And we believe work experience aspect of it is fundamental for the students, to give them that insider view to what we're all about. So we've got another sub goal for half of all member firms to offer up work experience placements. So not only is it a great opportunity for students to get that insider view, as I mentioned, but also from a firm's perspective, you're showcasing yourself to this top talent that you really want and need in your business. So yeah, please do get involved and support the programme in any way that you can.
Fantastic. Well, we've had one great question in from the audience, which is around sort of a move away from just diversity and inclusion to diversity, equity and inclusion. And perhaps we've not spoken about equity very much today. So perhaps if any of you have got a perspective on the importance of equity within the work that you're doing. Maybe Gavin, I could ask you to give your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, certainly in the discussions around race and ethnicity, this discussion around equity or inequity has been rumbling a long time, and it's the view that there's two perspectives. The first is that actually, how do you give marginalised group actually ownership in or stake in actually what they are doing? And I think that's the opposite of marginalisation, is actually having some type of ownership. The second is this idea of levelling the playing field. So actually removing the barriers is one thing, but then actually how do you give people the same opportunity as others? And that, I think, is a societal element and also exists within the workplace as well. So yeah, look, absolutely agree. The only thing I would say is that sometimes it feels like we keep adding more words and letters and acronyms to the whole issue, when call it what you want, the challenges are the same, have always been there. So we haven't, pivoted. If it was diversity, equity and inclusion, I don't think we'd be doing anything different. I think we'd be carrying on doing what we're doing, but no, the point is taken.
Emma or Katie, anything to add to that? No, okay.
Oh, well, Katie, did you want to go first?
Yeah, go on. I'll go first. So I completely agree with Gavin. I think, it's so important that we look through a diversity lens with equity as well. What I will add is that it's also important for our member firms. How you think about bringing people along the journey, having emotional investment to this thing that we are all trying to change. Actually, important that folk really understand why we're asking them to do what we're not just telling them, and we want them to then with us at every step of the way. So I think it's important for the individuals, but also at decision maker as well.
Thanks, Katie. Emma, anything to add?
Maybe just on a tangential point, I really like the term belonging, so the D&I and belonging, because you can have inclusion, but people don't belong. And someone gave me a really good analogy whereby, you might get invited to your partner's school reunion. You've been invited, you're included, but you absolutely do not belong there. You did not go to that school or what club or whatever it was, and you don't belong. So I think that is very representative of where we kind of might be still in the industry. We're working on the diversity, we're trying to include people, but even when they're in the organisations, do they belong? Are we letting them bring them, their whole selves to work, or are we just making them fit the mould? And I think that's the next stage of the puzzle, where we really need to work on how we integrate all these different cultures, whatever it might be, skill sets, and actually use them in their best capacity, and not try and make them fit the existing mould, but to say you can help enhance our culture, you can help enhance our offering to clients, and just go off on that. So maybe a slightly tangential point.
No, I agree. Belonging is a very key part of it. So we've got a question here, probably for Gavin, which is around the the ethnicity pay gap reporting or lack thereof, and that the employers and governments sort of say, well, we haven't got the data, but how do we encourage organisations to take this seriously and start to, on a voluntary basis, report ethnicity pay gaps? Have you got any thoughts on that, Gavin?
Yeah, so we debated. We have debated this long and hard. I mean, just some practical things. Like, firstly, there is no. I think a lot of firms don't understand about the ethnicity pay gap reporting, and you don't. You have the ability to collect data, and you have the ability to report it. There is nothing stopping you legally or in terms of regulation. So it can be done. I also think that the discussions around we don't have the data and etc. That may be true, but ultimately this really is a question of why is your population not actually asking or responding to your request for data, and fundamentally that's a cultural and trust issue. So the challenges around data need to be you need to look within rather than outwardly if you're having challenges collecting the data. I do think that one of the key catalysts here will be the collection of and reporting of this ethnicity data, as it has been with gender pay gap reporting. So don't want to underestimate it. But when we were thinking about what we are going to challenge the industry to do, as soon as you discuss this point around ethnicity pay gap reporting, it then gets down into data. So we felt, what is the step that firms can take just before that, and where can they really focus within maybe a shorter time period? So just understanding your demographic enables you to lay the foundations to start collecting the data for ethnicity pay gap reporting. So if you understand the demographic in the organisation and you get to a decent disclosure rate, that means that you have all the tools in place. Firstly, the data, but also you would have built trust. You'll understand the barriers to actually people disclosing. So I think we need to maybe take this in steps, because this something's been bandied around so much, we haven't seen anything done. If we wait for the government to issue this, then we'll still be waiting. So what can we as a collective do? And maybe the first step really is about, okay, so how do we actually understand the demographic? And honestly, a lot of firms are already doing this, so I don't think it will come as a surprise. What we feel we will focus on is how can we, or what can we do as an industry to increase that disclosure rate? And maybe that's the first step to get to that point where in a few years' time we can talk about ethnicity pay gap reporting with a degree of confidence that we can actually see it through.
And I'd just like to add that there are a couple of 2 or 3 initiatives out there that I think might help push this along. So on Wednesday, the Investment Association will be publishing their diversity data report, which really sets out how companies, why it's important to collect data, but also how to collect the data. And I hope there'll be a lot in there about how do you manage the program and build that trust to improve disclosure rates. And at the same time, the asset owners and the consultants are going to be asking more questions about diversity, both data and more qualitative points. So there'll be an external pressure to be collecting data and being able to share that and show what you're doing about the data as well. So I think a mixture of sort of internal and external pressures could push things along very nicely and meet that 90% disclosure rate over time. So thank you for that. Are there any more questions? I think we've got, there might be another one. There's another, just a point for people to look at in terms of looking at profiles of MBA courses and having diversity in terms of panels and so on, to show that the industry isn't just full of middle-aged white men. Thank you for that, Erin. I'd now like to turn to what advice the panelists would have for the people on this call. What sort of 2 or 3 things do you think everybody listening to this call could do themselves? We often point the finger at what organizations can be doing, but actually organizations are just the sum of the individuals that make them up. So perhaps I could start with Katie. What 2 or 3 things would you like everybody on this call to be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jane. So I think number 1 is become an ally, understand what an ally is and how you as an individual can help and make a difference. Promote self-learning. So specifically for mental health, educate yourself, educate your teams and promote self-learning within your respective organisations. And I think the third and probably most important one for me is to talk. So talk within your families, within your friendship groups and within your organisations as well, to normalize conversations on mental health and plus break down the taboos.
Thank you. Gavin, what would you like everybody on the call to be doing?
So I was wildly distracted by something moving in your bed, Katie.
Oh yeah, the dog.
Op pops your dog. So I'm sure I wasn't the only one. So yeah. So I think, look, we've outlined 5 kinks and they are like enduring. And I think the key thing would be pick one. If you can pick more than one, that's great. But in the bounds of capacity, pick one and figure out what you can do about it. So we have launched initiatives across all 5. So we feel we've held up our end of the bargain. We aren't the only game in town, so there are other initiatives focused on these things, and it doesn't matter who or what or how. The key thing is that individuals take personal responsibility. So for example, if it's about taboo, then engage with the discussion, engage with the debate. And if you don't want to do that verbally, then educate oneself, read about it. There's so much out there now. A lot of what we've done in terms of Talk About Black is on YouTube, on our channel, or on countless podcasts that we've done. So engage with the topic and have the conversation. Then in terms of the others, I mean, look, progression. The progression isn't just about you as a manager promoting talent. As Emma outlined, one of the reasons why minority groups don't progress is this idea of belonging and authenticity. So do think about the culture on an individual basis here. Do think about the culture which your actions create, because you can be inclusive actively. It doesn't happen passively. So it might be, if you have more junior members in the team, asking them first. It might be just being culturally aware of the discussions that you are are having, and maybe not doing certain things, like certain behaviours that might be that marginalising groups. Just be conscious about what they are. And then in terms of other elements, you can mentor minority talent. You don't need a group to do that. Believe me, they would welcome it, because there was a huge burden on the small number of senior Black professionals. And then we've launched a whole bunch of initiatives. So the skills workshop, is happening, and firms, if you haven't yet, there was an opportunity to get involved. We've launched an after-school program, which we'll be continuing with. Again, contact us if you want to get involved. So there are a myriad of things you can do, and I would just say to Casey's point, that is allyship, and allyship is absolutely an active process.
Thanks, Gavin. And Emma, what 2 or 3 things do you think the audience could do to support the efforts around early careers and social mobility?
Yeah, I think a really similar message from me, just an easy one, is get behind all of the different initiatives that we as the Diversity Project are running. As a collective, we can do so much more together than you going out alone as single firms. Obviously, I'm pushing for everyone to get involved in the investment springboard in any way possible, if that is of interest. As Gavin mentioned, on a personal level, you can get involved to be a mentor. There are lots of different activities and events to get involved with, or more widely, just spreading the message at your firms of all the different and great things that are going on within the Diversity Project. Getting your firm to offer up work experience. It might be setting up a returner program. There's all sorts that you could do. So please just use our resources that we've got, and we can help in lots of different ways.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We've had a couple more questions. One is around how this initiative fits into ESG. Is that an opportunity to kind of put these kind of initiatives within that framework? And I'll perhaps start with Emma, given your role at LCP. How do you see it fitting?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and it's one I've been thinking about quite a lot recently. As Jane mentioned, there's a consultants group who are putting together a very extensive questionnaire alongside the asset owners who are doing this as well. We're working together on it. And it's whether you integrate it into ESG stuff, analysis, and how we're assessing investment managers, or actually whether it's just going to be something separate, because there's so much to it. It's actually quite difficult to integrate it. In short, I'm in 2 minds, actually, which is the best approach to do. I think it's, a really good conversation topic, and one that needs a bit of debate from both sides. It's fair to say
it seems as though people have different views. So some people sort of, there's how do you build D&I or DE&I questions into when you're asking asset managers about the investments that they're making on your behalf, as opposed to what they're doing about their own culture. So exactly. Perhaps that's where the two a slightly different focus might be helpful.
Yeah, because we want the investment teams to be diverse themselves so that they make the best decisions possible. But then we also want them to be quizzing the companies that they invest in to make sure that they're themselves diverse, so that they're going to be successful as well. So it's that 2-pronged approach. Watch this space, basically.
I was going to ask Helena if she could join the panel, because we've got a question here from Yasmin.
Happy to.
About a bit more background on what led to the goals in the 3 areas that you announced at the beginning of the session.
So, well, I guess it's been a few-stage process. So one, obviously, that the general agreement, I think, amongst, and I consulted with the advisory council members first, that we do need some focal points, that there's a huge amount of activity, but it's easy to confuse activity with action. And by setting some very clear targets, then we can focus member firms as well as ourselves. So that's sort of sort of general background. Secondly, then, of course, there was consultation with the underlying work streams. Now, I chair the gender one, so I get prerogative on that. And there I was working backwards really from the explained, already announced 10-year goals that we set. And just, I suppose, interpolating is the proper word that I'm looking for, to get something plausible in 5 years. And I did add, it was a little bit of a straw person, the equal take-up of stocks and shares ISAs by men and women, because I feel that we should remember always that we're ultimately not doing this just for our own sake, but to achieve better outcomes for clients and customers. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit on that. Ethnicity, as Gavin has said, it was clear that everything hinged on data, and therefore the focus for now should be on data, and we should use that for secondary targets in 2 years' time. And then the socioeconomic ones were set a combination of consulting with Emma and her team, who do Richard Stevens as a co-lead on the early careers, and then the relatively recently formed group on socioeconomic diversity within the diversity project. And again, they came up with some specifics, for example, around the 80% State Street educated students. And again, just to emphasize, if what's behind the question is, well, why not another target on LGBT, or why not a target on neurodiversity? Some of the work streams do already have targets. So LGBT, great, as I mentioned in my introduction, is well on its way to the goal of 1,000 openly gay or allies within the industry. So we basically have decided those 3 areas, if we achieve those goals, I'm really confident that we will have achieved success in other areas as well. And by the same token, if we achieve success in, for example, if all our member firms have achieved at least the minimum threshold of disability confident, but we haven't made any progress on how many Black fund managers there are, I don't think we'll be able to claim success. So this is a bit of, just putting things out there. But I think it is very important to now, in our second 5 years, to have much tighter targets that we will hold ourselves accountable against. Hopefully that answers Yasmin's question, but perhaps you can follow up with me.
Thank you. There's one more question, and perhaps it might be for Gavin, which is about, do we need more regulatory reporting to really affect change in our industry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've touched on every aspect of this, but like the key question is, what are the catalysts for change? So like, it's either going to come from the firms themselves, normally led by the C-suite, where they say, actually, like, let's think about like data and reporting, and we really need to get to grips with this. And some firms are already doing that. So I think there are some firms, there are many firms who are actually really trying to, gather the data. It's taken like incredibly seriously by the organization. But there are many firms who are either not or are struggling to get the data. And the other question is, therefore, what are the catalysts for change? And some of those have been outlined already. So think about the value chain and the role of investment consultants or asset owners. So if our clients or allocators of capital start demanding this, and I also think that will move the industry. But of course, the other place where this can come from could absolutely be the regulator or from legislation. The challenge with this is that like our goals a couple of years ago were to sign the Race at Work Charter. And one of the goals was to publish ethnicity data. So this is what we said is nothing new. But what we found is that firms didn't do it, or were waiting for something else to happen. And it just hasn't occurred yet. So yes, of course, that would move the dial further. It can't be denied, but in lieu of that happening, I think we need to take the responsibility upon our own shoulders and get ahead of it, because again, there is no impediment to us doing so other than our own will.
Thank you. Well, we're up against the hour, so I would like to thank the panel for their contributions, both over the last few years, but also this afternoon in sharing their thoughts on where we've got to. And thank you to Steve for writing the book, and for Helena for shivving us along and showing us great leadership. So thank you very much for joining the panel session and the event this afternoon. And here's to the next 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks, everybody. Bye.